Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. So today I want to talk a little bit about a problem that I've noticed on QNAP NAS, but could very well exist on other installations that use LXD containers. So specifically, this is related to a too many files error and also another error that I'll point out a little bit later. So LXD may report the error, failed to allocate directory watch, too many open files. And this will affect your containers by preventing them from starting or perhaps causing odd things to happen in them. You may also see errors like this in the container logs if you look at the consoles of the container, where it talks about a problem with C groups where it says file exists, failed to create directory. A C group is a Linux kernel feature that limits memory or CPU resources and even really network and I/O resources that a process can use and are frequently part of containers. So these errors have affected the LXD instances on my QNAP NAS. Sometimes a new LXD container will not start, and other times a reboot will fail to start all of my containers. So this is a resource allocation problem. Go to the command line and issue the following command: sysctl fs.inotify. And you can see here that it brings back three values: max queued events, max user instances, and max user watches. And these numbers here are the default numbers that I had on my QNAP NAS before I made modifications to them. So these were even lower on a standalone bare metal server on which LXD was loaded. These values appear to cause issues when you exceed around 15 to 20 LXD containers. You may see errors sooner or later. And then the second issue that I want to talk about in this video are what I call QNAP invisible containers. On my QNAP NAS, I've experienced a problem where not all containers are listed in Container Station. These containers are running fine and they show from the CLI, and they also show from LXD dashboard, which I've featured on previous videos on the channel. These are containers that were created from the CLI, and sometimes they just don't receive a value for the OS and the OS release name. Setting these values manually causes the container to become visible again from the point of view of Container Station. So let's go see how to make these changes. So here we are at the command line prompt, and I'm getting ready to SSH over to my production QNAP NAS. And note that I'm going in through the admin account, and that's going to be important for what we're going to accomplish today. So as I SSH over there, you're first presented with the console management menu. You do a quit to return, and then you do a yes, I want to go to the console environment. At that point in time, you want to do a fs or sysctl fs.inotify, and you can see what your current values are. I've already increased the values of my system. I changed the value for, let's see, max queued events to 32,768. If I hit it again, it'll just acknowledge that it's set up to that particular value. I believe the original value is probably about half that. The next value is the value for iNotify max user instances. I believe this was either set at 128 or 256, and I set it up to 512, and that's the value for it. And the final one is the max user watches, which I actually think is probably the most important here. And the max user watches I set to 524,288. It was originally around 128,000. If you read the documentation online, they mention that this is the thing responsible in LXD for the too many files open errors problem. And I also believe that it's somewhat related to the problem that we are having with the C group errors. The next subject I want to cover, which is interesting but unrelated to the first topic, is at the prompt. If you do a docker ps, you can see that we're running 4 Docker containers. And recall that Container Station gives you a view of your Docker containers and also your LXD containers. If I do a LXC list here, I'll see all of my LXC containers. So the issue is that if you go to the web browser and we look at Container Station, Container Station says it has a total of 26 containers running, and those 26 would be those Docker containers we just saw, plus all of the LXD containers we saw. The only problem with that is that there are 4 Docker containers, and there's 32 LXD containers that I have on my system, and that totals to 36. And that leads you to believe that there are actually several of these containers that are missing. If we go to LXD dashboard, which I've covered on the channel before, you can see that there's 32 containers. So 32 containers in LXD plus 4 containers in Docker should equal a total of 36 containers, and yet we're seeing 26. So there are 10 LXD containers that are somehow missing from Container Station. In looking back at LXD dashboard, I can see that the first container that is not present in Container Station is a container called File Portal. So if I move back over here and I look alphabetically, you can see that File Portal is not listed. When I go back to LXD dashboard, you can see one of the differences between File Portal and these other containers is that it does not know that Ubuntu is the operating system instance. So in every case where I've noticed a container missing, I've discovered there are actually 2 pieces of information that are missing. One of them is the OS name, and we can change it by saying lexc config set file portal image.os equals Ubuntu. Now watch this number here. It says there's 26 containers running. When I hit enter, it doesn't make any change to that value. However, there's also another value that we need to change, and I know when I created that container that I created that container with the focal fossa version of Ubuntu, which is 2004. So then I set the image.release value to be focal. Now if you watch closely here, there we go. We have 27 containers running, and File Portal is now visible. So you might conclude that the missing Container Station instances were perhaps instances that I created from the command line, and I can tell you that that's not always true. But I can tell you that if those values somehow are missing, that Container Station will not be able to view those particular containers. So looking back, the next one I come up with is a container for my Jitsi server. And if I type in Jitsi and I set the OS instance to be Ubuntu, you notice that the number doesn't quite jump up. But then if I come back over here and I set the release to be focal, because I do know that my Jitsi instance is also focal fossa Ubuntu 2004, when I change it, this number will increment to 28, and the Jitsi server is here now viewable. And now with the magic of video, you can see that I've updated all 10 of the missing LXD containers and added the OS image name as well as the release name to each of them, resulting in a total of 32 containers that are LXD containers, and of course the 4 Docker containers. And now Container Station correctly shows all 36 containers, and they're all viewable and manageable from Container Station once again. In summary, we learned how to make changes to the fs.inotify.max variables to avoid the too many files open errors, and hopefully also solve the cgroup errors that occur in certain LXD containers. We learned how to make LXD containers visible that might have been missing in the Container Station interface. The issues described in this video may have occurred from having a larger number of LXD containers running on my QNAP NAS. It's important to learn how to make tuning changes to any system to avoid performance problems. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel and hit that notification bell so you can be aware of future videos. Thank you.